Hi, this is the Magnificent Midlife Podcast, and I'm Rachel Lancaster. This is where we celebrate women in midlife and beyond. We challenge the status quo and bash those negative stereotypes about being an older woman. We're not over the hill at 40, 50, 60. We're just getting started, and the world needs us now more than ever. I'll be talking all things midlife, about issues that matter, and sharing fabulous stories of amazing women doing very cool stuff. Now is our time. My guest today is Dr. Christine Lee, and she is the Procrastination Coach. She's a clinical psychologist who helps people find their creativity, confidence, and calm. She has a wonderful podcast called Make Time for Success. Christine, it's lovely to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Rachel. It's so lovely to be on your show. Thanks for having me, and hi to your listeners.
So I'd like to kick off by asking, why have you decided to focus in on procrastination?
Great question to start off with. I decided this many years ago. Probably we're going on 15 years, if not more. And what happened was I was a licensed psychologist in my first real position at a university counseling service. And one of the deans there asked for a workshop on procrastination. And I volunteered for that task very willingly and happily, but with no awareness of what that would entail or what really the subject matter would mean. I think, even in terms of running a simple workshop. And then I read the first book, which was Procrastination by Burka and Yuen, Y-U-E-N, and realized that I was actually patient number one for the issue, that I had very serious, very chronic, and very unrecognized problems with procrastination. And I had had those issues dating back at least until high school. I know I struggled and could not meet deadlines safely back in high school. And once I realized, after running that workshop and finding it to be really fun and really transformative for the attendees, I realized this is an area that I could have a voice in, and that I could have an impact in, and that it was an area that nobody was really taking on as the main topic of focus. And I think that's where my being a psychologist is helpful, that in some ways our specialty is to talk about areas that people have difficulty talking about.
And it's very niche, isn't it, though? Even it's a very niche area.
I
Really
call it the
interesting.
biggest niche there is.
Yeah, we're all in it, aren't we?
Yes.
It's niche, but we're all in it.
Yes.
So why is procrastination such an issue for people? And I know we're going to get onto why it is particularly for women, but why is it such an issue?
I think it's an issue just because it's a human impulse that all of us at some point in our lives have done procrastination, and done it willingly, done it accidentally, done it under stress. And that's, in my view, not a problem at all. I think the problems happen when we start to rely on procrastination as a response to stress. And what I found is that when we do that, and what I did in my own life, we end up creating other problems to pile on top of the original problem. And the procrastination prevents us from finding and exploring and creating the solutions to the original problem. So we get stuck in this cycle of helplessness, hopelessness, isolation, not seeing the opportunities that are around us, and not being connected to what we're really here to do, which is to create, to expand our being, to have fun. Procrastination is a lid on all of those wonderful life experiences. And that's why I think it's such an important experience to get a handle on, that just a little bit of exploration about what is your resistance about, what is your fear around, can release the pressure and then allow the natural skills to spill out and come forward.
And does it always come back to fear?
I think most most times there is some original fear that causes us to say, okay, hold the functioning. Let's stop the presses. Let's stop the creative machine because there's something that we need to stay away from. And it can be anything. It can be criticism. It can be uh, fear of success. It can be fear of finding something out about ourselves that we fear might not actually fit with how we see ourselves. So, fear of a shift in identity when really we're changing minute by minute and we're not even tracking that. So, one of the recovery pieces that we have is that we need to get comfortable with the idea that we're flowing rivers instead of cement blocks, kind of just building block after block. We're really in flow in all the different directions. Aging is one of the areas, right? Experience, getting good at things, taking risks, these all involve being able to change. So, one thing that we want to prioritize is our ability to change, our ability to stay resilient despite the fact that things might not be going the way we anticipated or that we prefer. Death is one area where no one actually prefers to have to calculate the fact that death is in the equation. We're all facing our upcoming death. We are all having to deal with the death of loved ones or people in our lives. And sometimes we want to just freeze the present moment so that we don't have to deal with frightening things like that or upsetting or unpreferred events like death. But I think we need to be real with reality. That's another recovery technique, is to really face in the moment what is true. What is true is that people die. What is true is that we change and grow, even when we refuse to look at that and look at those processes like menopause, like midlife, like perimenopause. These are things that are going to happen no matter how much you're trying to avoid that concept. And as you so beautifully do in your work, Rachel, it's the embracing of the reality that allows us to live the most fully in that reality. When we deny and avoid, as with procrastination, we end up getting the darker part of the room, the dark corner of the room, rather than the fresh air, rather than the outside feeling, rather than the feeling that we really are in control of our bodily and mental machine. And that machine is so powerful that it could never be really hindered by one small fear.
Ooh, I've got goosebumps just listening to you. Wow, that is profound. That is really profound. I love that idea that yeah, we are a flowing river and that we are growing despite everything. And you're so right. We can't put the brakes on. We can't say this isn't gonna happen because it is gonna happen. And as you say, if we embrace it and if we flow along the river, that's where the bounty is, isn't it? Rather than limiting ourselves.
Always. For some reason, I'm going to shift the conversation to the period, to menstruation. And in college, I took a course, I think it was women and religion, something like that. But there was a whole section on how women who are menstruating in different cultures are forced to separate from other people, to go into huts, to are seen as toxic during that period of time. And I thought that was fascinating, disturbing, interesting, and also just so mind blowing all at the same time. And that really is kind of the not flowing version of treating the flow, the literal flow, that when we do that, we're depriving ourselves of a whole quarter of our experience, the reality of nature, and this life giving process that we each have in us as women or Some have issues with the flow, but we all have that as a natural process within us. And I feel like there's some sort of correlation with procrastination and stopping that flow. We're stopping and refusing to let what is within us leave. And if you see yourself as this creative machine with a natural flow, with a natural power and energy, maybe you'll be a little less afraid the next time someone asks you for something new, or you're volunteering for a workshop that you have no business volunteering for, that maybe you'll just step ahead and say, I'm going to do the best that I can. I accept all feedback that is coming my way. And let's just see what happens. We know that this is going to be in the past in a short while. So let's just see what we can make of it now.
Christine, have you read any of the work of Red School?
No, I have not.
So you're going to love a podcast episode that is coming out in 2022, and it'll probably be out in January. So last week I interviewed the founders of Red School, and they've written a book called Wild Power, which is all about embracing the power of the menstrual cycle. And next year they're going to be writing one about, publishing one about menopause. So I was talking to them about the power of menopause. But I read their book, Wild Power, before I spoke to them on the podcast. And it was absolutely transformational for me because I did not understand the whole cyclical nature of women and the power of menstruality, the power of the cycle. And I feel really cheated. I actually say this in the podcast. It's like, I'm only finding out now and I haven't had a bleed for over a decade, and it's like, I missed out on all of this then, but it is so powerful. And what was interesting as well, because Alexandra, who I think is in her 70s, and she is sort of leading the menopause side of it, and Shani is in her 40s and still hasn't been through menopause. But they talk about, it's fascinating, they talk about the business preparing for Shani's menopause. And I thought, blimey, there's a company out there preparing for a leader's menopause. Isn't that amazing? But she talked about that when you get to menopause, if you have embraced the cycle and practice what they talk about as menstrual cycle awareness, so that you are aware of the fluctuations of your emotions and everything else through your menstrual cycle, then you get to menopause and it's a very easy, well, not an easy transition, but it's much easier because you are aware of what your body is doing and you have that conscious knowledge of what's happening to you, and you're not fighting it. You're not trying to stop it. You're not trying to control it. You are going with the flow.
And you're not seeing it as a dangerous event.
Yeah.
So if we're reducing the fear, that's always going to help, no matter what you're going through. If you're reducing the fear and anxiety level, your coping ability is going to improve.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I went off on a bit of a tangent there, but I love that idea of embracing the menstrual flow and then the power that comes within it. It's brilliant.
And you're reminding me that it's not just the days of the bleed, it's actually a 28-day cycle for women. And it does include the weeks before and the lead up to the bleed. And yes, you can actually map your productivity to your cycle. And there, I think, are a few influencers these days who are advocating that we do that we take the power away from the 24-hour male cycle and bring it closer to the 28-day cycle for women.
And then, of course, there's me as the postmenopausal woman. I'm thinking, well, where's my cycle now? What do I do? And the idea is to follow the cycle of the moon. So I now have a clock on my wall here, which is the cycles of the moon. And I'm just playing with it. I'm just dabbling and seeing whether there is any correlation at all between the way the moon moves and the way I feel. And but it's interesting. It's I would never ever have considered this, 10, 20 years ago. And I say this on the podcast with Red School, but now I'm open to anything. I like, bring it on. Let's try it out and see.
Well, like you mentioned on my podcast when you were kindly on, you said it was actually the postmenopausal period that has become your most fertile period. So it
Yeah.
makes sense that you're kind of coming up with all of these different things to try. And I do feel that society and our educational training and our early work training really leads us to believe that everything about productivity is externally based. We're racing to meet deadlines. We are wanting to have the approval of our superiors or of the agency that we're working within. And I think there's a little bit of a disconnect for us, perhaps as women in particular, because the inner workings of productivity are not discussed so much, where our own cycles of focus and need for rest and focus again and need for rest and what we're good at, even, what are our bright spots? What are the things that we can rely on creativity wise or execution wise or mapping out the future or foreseeing problems? Sometimes that does connect with the external demands, but I think we need to put a lot more focus on the internal productivity system. What am I good at? What can I rely on? What do I need to shore up so that I know I'm a reliable producer for myself? That it's my goals that I want to push forward. And I also want to do well as an employee or as an entrepreneur or as a student. I want to do well in life, but that involves a coordination between the external and internal demands. And I think that's where we get things like imposter syndrome, burnout, physical burnout, when we're not paying attention to the need for rest, the need for the observation of cycles, not just the menstrual cycle. And working honestly can be a brutal affair when we stop paying attention to what our body and our mind need.
And I think often we can get stuck in the busyness, can't we, as a way of procrastinating. I know that is something that I do. I was talking about it just with my assistant this morning, because there's so many things I need to do that are actually quite easy for me to do. So I can tick the box and I can get things off the to-do list, and then I can feel as if I've been productive. And yet I know that I'm using those things to procrastinate on the bigger stuff, the stuff that is going to move me forward more than my box ticking exercise. But I need to do the box ticking exercise, but then that takes priority. So what tips do you have for me when I'm doing that as my favored way of procrastinating?
Well, that's the subtlest form, right? And it is so common, and I think we all do that sometimes, and it is really a relief to sometimes be able to check off a simple box. So
That's how
allow
I do it.
yourself,
It's like my
allow
dopamine
yourself,
hit.
allow yourself that joy. We need that. We actually do need that, and it is part of the bigger project. And I think it can be periodically just reconnecting with your purpose, with the bigger goals, things like vision boards, having your vision board on your screen or in your office or in your bedroom, wherever you're going to see it routinely, so that it's not necessarily even a hyper conscious process, but that is something that we know we're going to get there. We have trust and faith so that the to-do list items, every action that we take across the day is in some way an affirmation that we're going to get to where we want to be. For me lately, with the pandemic still being an issue for us in the United States and everywhere else, I have found that just doing a simple meditation in the morning can make all the difference. I just about 2 weeks ago decided I need to straighten some of my energy out more than I have been. And I decided I'm going to do a maximum of 10 minutes a morning. So it could be anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes. I use the Insight Timer app. Again, it's Insight Timer. And it's a beautifully created app because you just set, okay, 10 minutes. Okay, I want a guided meditation. You pick one that's highly rated and then you go. So I don't have any expectations. I don't have any demands of this time, but I know that I'm doing this as a conscious practice to settle myself in for the day, to start well with the day. And I noticed that the one day that I skipped was the day that ended the most chaotically. I felt like I couldn't get myself down to bed. I felt like my eating was a little bit more out of control than it needed to be. And I raced back to meditation the next morning, thinking this may or may not be because of the meditation, but I'm going to trust that this does not harm me and it may actually give me the leg up that I'm looking for.
I love it too. I am now doing it daily. And I have to confess, this morning I didn't do my meditation because things were happening in the house and I didn't get it done. But normally I do 10 minutes too. And I was trying to do 20 and then I stopped doing 20 because 20 was a bit too long. But I think we can all do 10, can't we? We can all do 10 minutes at some stage. And I use the Calm app. I looked at it for ages and thought, oh, I don't want to invest in that. And I've used Insight Time. I don't want to invest in the Calm app. And then there was a deal with 40% off and I invested in it. And then they suckered me in after that with a lifetime membership. And I paid for that as well because it's brilliant. I love it.
That's really good.
And
I should try that.
I absolutely love it. And there's always a theme every day. So it's a mindfulness meditation, but there is something to learn every single day. And I love to learn. I love to experience new things and ideas. And I love it. It's brilliant. And sometimes recently I have felt so stressed about the world because by heck, it's bonkers at the moment. We're recording this in the run up to the holiday season and it just all seems to have kicked off here in the UK again. And it's like, oh, please. And the pressure it's overwhelming and it just keeps going. So I think, yeah, the meditation becomes even more. And a couple of evenings in the last sort of week or so, I have sat down and I've done a 25-minute sit with a guided meditation on the Calm app with Tara Brach, who I really like her meditations.
Mm-hmm.
And I've just sat there and I felt so much better at the end of it. It really is. It's been so soothing to do that. I've actually finally worked out what meditation is. It's
Yes.
taken me a long time.
Yes. I think me too. And maybe that is the beauty of aging, that you finally find your way and you finally allow the things that have been wanting to come in maybe for years.
Yes.
And when you're talking about the Calm app, I'm thinking of two things. One is that forgiveness is another recovery strategy where if you get into the practice of saying, oh, that may not have been my original plan, I landed here, forgive that whole process. Forgive yourself for maybe choosing in a way that didn't really work for you. That's part of the path. And the quicker you can release yourself from any shame or guilt that you might have or generate from that, the better you are for the next piece of enjoyment that's waiting for you around the corner. The second thing is something that Oprah said many, many years ago that stuck with me. I think it's the one thing that she said that really stuck with me. And that is, if you need to spend a few dollars to get yourself to be more organized or productive or well, spend that money. And from that point on, I just experimented with productivity apps and planners and shelving, whatever I needed to, because
Yeah.
it's an experiment and it's okay. It's a few dollars. You don't have to get yourself worked up about everything because then everything is a drain or a dread or a financial loss. What if this one little app rescued everything? We don't think in that way sometimes. We think about, oh, it's an extra $5 a month that I've lost. Let's not calculate the losses. Let's think about the wins that we're hoping for and are likely to get when we really invest, when we really put our energy into it. And that helps to answer kind of how do we get the big goals? We need to invest in the goal and we need to invest in ourselves in multiple different ways. It might be meditation for you and me, but it might be dancing or cycling for somebody else. Find your own way. Find that power route where you protect your energy, you protect your ego, and you learn that your goals are there for you to pursue. There's nothing really blocking you except whatever's inside of you that has yet to be cleared out.
Yeah, because ultimately it's all what's going on in our heads, isn't it, as to what we can and can't do.
Absolutely.
And I know,
Daunting.
yeah, you mentioned anxiety earlier, and I think, I've touched on it as well. That I can feel my anxiety levels creeping up, and then that can lead to paralysis, can't it? It can be just too overwhelming, and I think the world is probably dealing with, procrastination on steroids at the moment, probably just because we're dealing with so much and having to cope with all the anxiety as well. So, what are your
Yes.
thoughts on that?
My thoughts bring me back to my early psychology training. And I forget who taught me this, but it was an important lesson that anxiety is a process or a concept that will take more real estate if not opposed. So if we're letting anxiety to just run rampant, it's going to take as much real estate in our minds and bodies as is permissible. So I take that piece of learning and try to combat stress every single day. Whatever's needed in that day, I will take the time. Sometimes it's therapy, sometimes it's acupuncture, sometimes it's just sitting in my chair and watching an episode of something. Sometimes it's eating a nice meal. Whatever it is, I just want to make sure that my stress level remains as low as I can manage. And given that I was this rampantly anxious woman back in the procrastination days, I feel like I've now got so many more tools at my disposal because I've learned how to cope with anxiety and how to steer clear of it and how to deal with it when it is threatening to take away my focus. I really prioritize my time, my energy, and my clarity of focus. And again, it's a practice. I was not born clearly with those skills ready to go. I really needed to develop those muscles and to allow myself to trust myself in a new way. And that happened in my, let's say, early 30s. So, it may be 50 for somebody else, it may be 70 for somebody else. But whenever it is, allow yourself to enjoy that opening up. And I think it is a life path. And I don't think there's a single route that we all travel. We all have to find our way. We all have to really trust those mighty strengths that we have inside of us.
It all comes back to mindfulness as well, doesn't it? That we have to be mindful of what's happening and then taking action to deal with what's happening and not letting it get out of control.
Yes. Yes. And play. Have play. Have fun. Have play every day. Have rest every day. Right? Not everything needs to be taken so seriously either.
Yeah, I like that. So how do you play?
How do I play? I think I work a little too much. I'll be honest. I want to be honest. And I would say play for me is dance, exercise and dance. I exercise by dancing. And I like learning too. So for me, anything that's new, anything that I can try on, anything that will make my heart flutter and then will bring me excitement afterwards, I like to try. I am trying to be a little bit more physically active. I would say the COVID period has made me much more sedentary than I think is good for me. I think in the COVID period, I wrote and published a book and launched a podcast. So there was a lot of work involved, but I think this phase of my life is going to involve a lot more movement, physical movement for sure.
So that brings us neatly onto your podcast. So I was going to ask you about that. So I didn't realize, so you started it in the COVID era. So that was a COVID baby, was it?
It was a COVID baby. It was actually January 11th of this year, 2021, that my first episode dropped. And I will say I procrastinated on the launch for several years. A
Oh, me
friend,
too. Me
oh
too.
yeah,
Been there. Yeah.
I think it's standard for podcasters that there is a significant period of time where you're just lost in a haze of thinking about it and
Mm,
envisioning it.
mm,
But there are a lot of pieces to put together for any single podcast. It's
mm,
both simple and complex at the same time.
mm.
I think the most complex piece of it is the emotional piece of saying, I'm ready to put my voice out for people to hear. But once you do, it's straight fun, isn't it?
Oh, it is. I love it so much. It's such fun. I have to say, I mean, people compliment me on my voice, but I love your voice. I think your
Oh,
voice is just lovely to listen to on the podcast. And you
oh,
have
thank you.
I don't know whether it's, maybe probably is because you're a psychologist. You are very good at asking questions that elicit interesting responses.
So I will say thank you for that kind comment. I am not particularly a fan of my own voice. I do think podcasting has helped me to develop my speaking voice. I love your speaking voice and your podcasting voice and your accent. And
But it sounds to me when you speak, it sounds like you've been broadcasting for years.
oh,
It
thank
really
you.
does.
At the start of my podcast, what my podcast is very much interview heavy,
Mm.
interview based. And I thought there would be a really smooth transition from being a psychologist to being a podcast interview, and it was anything but smooth. I was very rudely awakened to the fact that I needed to really explore my curiosity with my guests. And I don't necessarily do that with patients. It's not that I'm not curious about my patients, but my role as a therapist is to really reflect what they're producing, what they're feeling, what they're not seeing. And so my focus really is on their being. And as an interviewer, I almost have to focus in on what are my own reactions a
Mm,
lot more.
mm,
And that was a whole new skill to develop. And thankfully, you have episode after episode and you get to
mm,
find your own path there too.
mm.
So with
You find a
everything,
rhythm with it, don't you? You find that
yes.
you kind of get into a groove.
Yes. Yes. Now I have a format. I know that I love interviews. I love podcasting. So
Mm.
if any of your listeners are having an itch, I would say go explore that itch. It's really fun.
Yeah. And I think what's lovely about it is that, well, what finally pushed me into doing it is I wanted the world to hear my voice. I wanted the world to hear what I had to say. And that's not just ego driven because, well, it is partly, but it's not just that. It's about feeling that I have things to say and enough people weren't hearing them. So it's like, I want you to hear what I've got to say. So here I am on the podcast.
Yeah. I mean, you and I both have missions that are bigger than our egos.
Mm.
As big as
Yes.
our egos might be, that we have messages that really are going to affect a lot of people
Mm,
should they connect to just a piece
mm,
of the message. And so in some ways it feels like a responsibility
mm,
to broadcast as broadly as we can. It's
mm.
okay.
So what else have you learned about yourself by doing the podcast?
I have learned that having systems is really helpful. I could not have done this without my assistants and with a rhythm and with the pre-course that I took about podcasting. I think that set me up well. So it taught me that the resources are out there if I am open to connecting with them. Sometimes it's our ego that does get in the way
Mm-hmm.
of saying, "Oh, I can be helped by another person who's gone before me," or this assistant really can do the things that I want full control over. I want to say over how everything
Oh,
sounds.
relinquishing control. Oh, that's a
Right.
difficult one.
Right. And as we know, there's no perfect episode really. Every episode is just kind of its own being, its
Mm,
own concept. And that's what's so fun. There's nothing to perfect. We really just have to show up as fully as we can. And so I guess that's one of the lessons that I've taken away, is that it's a fun vehicle for me to show up in my fullest form,
And
publicly, I'll say.
it's an intimate, authentic medium as well, isn't it? Which that's what I love about it.
It is. It is. Our voice is right here.
Yeah. In somebody's ears. Hello, listener. Here we are. What have you learned from your podcast guests? Give me a couple of things that you've learned from your podcast guests.
Well, I think before I start on that, I'll say that I have realized that I never know the people that I bring on until we really dive into the interview. The things that I do know, I feel are such the surface pieces of who they are. And so I'm very grateful to the podcast format that it enables this depth of investigation into who the person is. And I've learned so much from my varied guests. I've learned about menopause and the enthusiasm that we can have in later life from you and some of my other guests. And I would say that women are rock stars, that women are just so beautiful in how complex we are and how giving we are and how knowledgeable we are and how there's this authentic piece about being a woman that I think I've learned from each person. I definitely have also learned that being light about things helps. I think that each of the women and the one man that I've had on so far, we've all been through some sort of relatively difficult journey, just by going through life, just by getting to the age that we are. And if we can take that and make something positive and light from it, we've won. So that there's an opportunity just in daily life. You don't have to have a mission. You don't have to have a purpose. That really being able to transform your everyday experiences into light lessons that can possibly help other people. That's really something to be grateful for. So I've learned gratitude. I've learned that I can learn from anybody that's on the show for sure. And that's been a pleasure. What have your lessons been from being a podcaster?
Ooh, she's turning it back. That's the problem when you interview a podcaster, they turn it back on you.
Very easily.
Oh, goodness me, so much, so much. Gosh, I mean, I've interviewed one woman who, she was held captive in a desert in Somalia for 93 days. And she talked about just surviving that. And then she talked about surviving the survival, because she will always be known for that. She will always carry that. She was rescued by Navy SEAL Team 6. And that was just learning, how something so impossible, and yet she found the strength and she found the resources within herself to survive it. And she carries on surviving it every single day of her life. Yeah, that was a big thing that I learned. But I've learned so much. Oh my goodness, I've learned how to, have good sex in midlife, which is great. I've learned how to talk about dying from a palliative care doctor. So much. And I think that's the excitement, isn't it? That we get to share these stories, we get to share this information, because knowledge is power. And the more we can talk about, that's why I'm always rabbiting on about menopause and hormones and hormonal balance and aging well. And I've learned that cold showers are really good. So every day now I have a cold shower blast in the middle of my my hot shower. And I tell you, it's bloody difficult in December. It's much easier to do that in the summer. So oh gosh.
I'm imagining listening to the survival story of a kidnapping would transform your life immediately by hearing that story. Yeah,
exactly. And that, I think, is her power, actually, because she goes around the world, not actually at the moment, but she does it, online, telling people about this experience, and it immediately puts everything into proportion in your life. It's like, okay, get a grip, Rachel. You can't really be complaining about this when you've had such an intimate understanding and connection. And in the podcast, she describes the night that Navy SEAL Team 6 comes in and rescues her. And you're holding your breath as she's telling this story. It is just incredible. And yeah, as you say, it just completely changes everything. Yeah.
I can't wait to listen to that episode.
Yeah, go and have a listen. It's Jess Buchanan. It's fantastic. It's fun, and she's such a remarkable woman. Yeah. Anyway, it's my turn to ask another question.
Sure.
So what would you most like women to take away from our conversation today?
I think one of the themes has been women's power, that we really might be dampening our natural power out of former training, out of expectations of others or of the workplace, out of fear, out of lack of awareness for things like the cycle and its influence on how we feel and think and perform. And I just want to encourage you to explore what you need for your own productivity cycle, for your own expansion and fun. Invest a few dollars if you need to. Buy the planner if you want to. Forgive yourself of the things that you feel might be holding you back or might be weighing you down, so that you could let your natural flow come through.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Magnificent Midlife Podcast. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, follow, and share it. Also, giving a 5-star review really helps get the word out. You'll find the show notes at magnificentmidlife.com. That's also where you can get my book, Magnificent Midlife: Transform Your Middle Years, Menopause, and Beyond. Make the very best of your next chapter. Help me change the world, one magnificent midlife woman at a time.